Our next keynote session is going to be on energy justice. You're probably thinking, if you hadn't really thought about that. And this is really, really important stuff. So I'm really looking forward to hearing. I can't imagine better folks to do this. We've got the director of the Bureau of Economic Geology and chairman of We have Dr. Scott Tinker, who's the state geologist of Texas, and director of the Bureau of Economic Geology. And then we also have the chairman of Switch Energy Alliance, SVP and partner Marcia Simpson will come up and share more on this topic. And we're going to have a little time for Q&A after they do their remarks. So have a pencil and paper, be ready, because we're going to leave time to make sure that you're engaged after their talk. So, Marcia?
Thank you very much. So, actually, I'm just going to introduce Dr. Scott Tinker. I'm Marcia Simpson, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Engineering and Operations for Chief Oil and Gas, which is a Dallas-based organization. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Scott Tinker. He's a native Texan. Dr. Tinker received his undergraduate degree in geology from Trinity University in San Antonio. Scott holds a master's degree and his PhD in geological sciences from the University of Colorado. He's the director of the Bureau of Economic Geology, the state geologist of Texas, and a professor at the University of Texas, Austin, and he's a very busy man. In addition to his many awards and positions, Dr. Tinker has dedicated his career and research to understanding of energy in our global society. In 2016, he started the nonprofit organization Switch Energy Alliance with a mission focused on energy education. Dr. Tinker has been involved in numerous educational videos and documentaries, including an award-winning documentary called Switch, which you should check out. It's very, very interesting. He examines the energy resources and viability of alternate energy options for our future. He also dives into the complexities of energy resources and availability on a global and socioeconomic scale. I'm only listing a few of Scott's credentials and accomplishments. I had the pleasure of meeting Scott several years ago at a conference, and after watching his documentaries and listening to him speak several times, my husband and I decided that he needed to be heard. So we invited him to this session. He speaks from a fact-based, nonpartisan, scientific perspective about the realities of all sources of energy. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Scott Tinker.
Thanks, Marcia. Gorgeous day. Flew up last night and been flying a lot lately. The planes are stuffed. If you haven't been on them, they cancel the empty ones and just fill you up into the next one. So I'm going to start with Aristotle. Why not? The mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Wouldn't that be nice? Right? That we could entertain some thought. We don't have to accept all of them, and that's what I want to do with you today. You might not like some of the things I say. Might fry your circuits. But I'm not here to make you happy. I'm not here to make you unhappy. I'm just here to have some critical thinking with you, to think about these things in a way that maybe we don't always do. And so let's start with the big picture. These are some issues facing the world today, and I think we would all agree on these. I'm going to highlight a bunch of them that relate to the conversations we were just having. I was listening to great conversations about poverty and the economy in the world, all these big issues. And energy sits here as well. So does climate change. And people try to paint that as an or, climate or energy. Which one are you for? It's not. There's more to the environment than just the atmosphere, though. I used to learn about the land, the air, and the water when I was in high school. Those matter, too, to the environment. So you put all those together, you get the environment and energy and the economy. And these things dance together, right? You can't separate them. So you take energy, and it underpins healthy economies. Everything you do involves energy. The clothes you're wearing, the water you're drinking, the food you're going to have at lunch, the chair you're sitting in, how you got here today. Every single thing in your life has energy. You don't think about it, but it does. Guess what? You have to have a healthy economy to invest in the environment. I've been in 60 countries in the world, not in airports, into them. And I've seen it. In all 60 countries, the worst environments in the world or where it's poor. They can't afford the kinds of things that we can to clean it up. These are kids, a picture I took in one of the largest slums in Africa, coming home from school across mounds of garbage, polluted water, polluted soils. I don't drink the water out of the tap in most countries. There's a reason for that. If you look at the air quality in the world, green is the cleanest, yellow's next down to red. Guess where it's green? Where it's rich. Okay? We clean it up. We have regulatory systems that clean up the air. Where is it red? Where it's poor. In fact, Sanakanchi here in Nepal, cooking indoors with wood or dung or hay or straw, charcoal. We spent a long time with her and her family. Breathing indoor smoke, which by the way is done by 3 billion people in the world today still, kills 3 million people every year. That's what COVID killed in 2020 globally. We shut down the global economy for that. Every single year, 3 million people are dying from that. So we have affordable, reliable energy. We got poverty, competition, growth, and we have the pillars of the environment: air, the atmosphere, land, and the water. It's complicated. There are legal, social, political systems that surround this. They're very interactive. It's not simple, okay? I call it the radical middle. It's radically lonely most of the time. You know, hey, come on in. It's not fun in here. We don't agree. We have to look at data. We have to be wrong, about things and compromise. But that's where all the action is. That's where these big issues are going to get solved. What do we want out of energy? We want it cheap. We want it reliable and clean. Wouldn't that be nice? Cheap, the economy. Reliable energy. Clean, the environment, right? These things dance together. And if you make them a ternary diagram, we geologists love these things. Everything has to sum to 100%. So if you look at the economy and think about cheap, is it volatile price or is it affordable? And boy, we want it. You see that gasoline clicking right there at the pump. You know what you're paying. And for electricity in your home, on the energy side, reliable, is it available or is it intermittent? And these things cost money. On the clean side, now everything on a ternary diagram has to sum to 100%. If I wanted 100% clean, I get 0% of the other two. Oops. That doesn't really work. In fact, we're bringing these things to that radical middle. And what we're describing here is the real world. If I map coal onto this, it's cheap and reliable. That's why we built our economy on it in the US. So did Germany, so did the UK, so is China and Vietnam, and probably so will India. But to clean it up makes it expensive. So it moves toward the expensive part. Solar and wind are clean, atmospherically at least. We'll talk about it a little more broadly. To make them reliable, because weird things happen every day, like night. So the sun isn't up, and we got to have electricity because we still want our lights to come on. To make it reliable, it makes it more expensive. Okay? It's trade-offs. There are trade-offs here. And it's not a bunch of political posturing, it's real trade-offs. So what do you see? What do you see here? What do you see in this image? Somebody yesterday, a student said, kale. I see kale, because we're about to go to lunch, Yeah, that's kind of cool. Lung tissue. Do you see Africa? Well, let's widen our view. Do you see Africa? The river systems of Africa, amazing. You could put 3 United States into Africa and still have more room. It's a massive continent, remarkable impact. We've got to widen our view to understand what we're really looking at, don't we? We've got to expand the conversation. Energy underpins everything in our lives, everything. Clean and dirty, good and bad, these are just political binary terms. They don't exist. There is no clean energy, and there's no dirty energy. They all have impacts. We're going to talk about that. Energy isn't simple. To oversimplify is to underestimate. But it is solvable. You can't solve it if you think it's simple. Okay, you have to begin to understand the complexities of this space globally to begin to really solve it. We got to manage these complex issues between energy, the environment, the economy to do it. We got to do it wisely and transition wisely. So it brings me to ESG. So what is it? Look, I'm thrilled, actually. It's a welcome change to corporations across the space, not just the dirty oil and gas companies, to corporations across the space. There's a discount being applied to non-performers now. Investors should require measurable progress, baselines that are set, and real analytics. We have to actually not just virtue signal. We have to do real things here. Emissions, impacts, flaring, mining, water. Where are you today? How are you getting better on these things and automate these things for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, things you might have heard about for climate change, the big climate conference. These kids they rally. I love it. They can rally instantly around the world, save Earth, save yourself. They get together and they protest, skip school, In the rich world, they do. There are about 5 billion other people that didn't hear about this because they're not connected to the rich world yet. All right? To them, ESG is just C. It's not the whole environment. It's just climate, just carbon. It might be to you as well. All right? But not to these kids. Not to these kids I met in Africa and their grandfather, who's my age. He had tears in his eyes when he told me his kids and grandkids were going to have things he's never had access to before. He'd never seen a road. It's a Maasai man. Here's kids that are in uniforms for the first time in school. Okay, down in Colombia, we brought first solar there, first electricity. They're not in school yet. Half the kids die before they reach adulthood of tooth infections and dysentery, things that don't kill us. Half of them die before they reach adulthood. 2 light bulbs dangling from the ceiling inside this school. And here's a little girl in a high school that has lights indoors today that they can see now instead of having to do it outside. These kids in Nepal, they're not in school. These are 5 children. She's 36 years old. One of her kids, the 17-year-old, has a kid. She's a grandma. They'd like to be in school. They wouldn't be skipping school. They'd like to be in school, okay? So to them, ESG is a little different. The environment is about the water, the air, and the land. They've heard of climate change, but it's not front of mind. How's my water? How's my air? How's my land? Food and shelter and clothing on the social side and governance, maybe education, some health care would be nice. How many people live like this? Is it just a handful? Well, there are 3 kinds of people in the world. Those who are good at math and those who aren't. So, which of the 3 are you? So let's do a little arithmetic. Let's look at the kilowatt hour usage of electricity in some countries in Africa. We filmed in Ethiopia and Kenya for our film on energy poverty, Switch On. You might not speak kilowatt hour, so I'll put it in terms we can understand. My fridge. My fridge consumes more electricity, 9 times more than a person in Ethiopia, and 3 times more than a Kenyan every year. 1 fridge. I have 2 fridges. One in the garage for beer. I'm a geologist. A beer fridge. Really efficient out in the garage in Texas. 18 times more energy than a person. That's energy poverty. And if you look at severe economic poverty across the bottom of this graph, $3 a day, $1,000 a year, living on and against electrification rate, access to electricity in a grid. This is Latin America. Brazil's the largest circle population-wise. It's mostly electrified in each country, and 10 to 20% severe poverty still. I'm going to add Asia at the same scale. Not as electrified, a lot more poverty, a lot more people. And here's Africa, another 1.1 billion people. By the way, the sum of the population in all of the Western Hemisphere, North and South America, is about 1.1 billion. Okay. Africa, 1.1, not electrified, severe poverty. So this is correlation. In science, it's not causation. Causative is hard, causation. To come out of poverty takes energy. But it gives us a paradox. Energy won't end poverty, but you can't get out of poverty without energy. It's one of the big things that allows for us to emerge and industrialize and grow and create wealth. It's time to power the people. 3/4 of the people that are under power today live in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. 3/4 of the world's population don't have much energy access today. Here's a map of global income. So this is economic poverty. $1,000 to $4,000 a year in the mid-range. Look where it exists. It's everywhere, by the way, but it's concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. All right, $4,000 a year. Now, if I add up to $12,000 a year, the next range, Latin America, Middle East, Eastern Europe, parts of Russia. So when you don't have any energy, you need it cheap. Just get started. When you have some, but it's not very reliable, that's another big part of the world. And we made a film called Switch On, and I'd like you to go see that. It's out on YouTube and everywhere. We went to 5 countries and looked at the positive things that are happening to get energy. Like when we brought first solar here to a mud hut and thatch roof village in Colombia, indigenous Arhuaco people. They'd never seen each other at night inside, except over a fire. And that last night, we turned on the lights, and it was a moment, we just sat there for hours, kind of looking at each other. A couple ceiling fans started to turn and one refrigerator for some vaccines. Energy poverty approximates economic poverty. So as you talk about energy justice, we're really talking about economic justice, much like the panel just discussed here. And energy is a piece of that, but it's bigger, perhaps, than we think. So when I go back here and look at the rich world, the blue, it's not very many places, is it? Us. Less than 1 billion people living with economic wealth. We want it clean. We've gone through the cheap and reliable phases. We want it clean. And so cheap, it depends on where you are in your global system, your government, your educational system, your economic development, your resources. It depends. And it leads me to this conversation about transitions, the many faces of transitions. Some fundamentals. We used to cook indoors with wood, over a fire and keep ourselves warm. And we used the sun back then over 1,000 years to grow hay. And hay fed our engines. They were called oxen and horses. They hauled their own fuel back in the day. And we used the motion of water for water mills and the motion of wind for windmills. They'd been around a long time. And then we used whales for the oil to light our homes with whale oil. And then along came bigger turbines in dams. And then something else that hauled its own food, coal came along and trains. And we burned coal, boil water, make steam, turn a turbine, run a generator. And along came electricity, which lights our homes and saved the whales in many ways. And then oil, liquids, really dense. We put it in our cars, refine it. We put it in our planes because it's got a lot of bang for the buck. Then methane. And finally, uranium and thorium, nuclear power. And why am I showing you this? This is one of the most important concepts in energy. It's called energy density. All right? We've gone from really low density energy, hay and solar and wind, to really high density energy, the bang for the buck per unit weight or volume or area. Hundreds of times denser. What does that mean? It means it takes less stuff to get it, to do the same amount of work, energy work. And we have terms we put on them: renewable, the sun and the wind are, thermal, a little more judgmental, clean, and dirty. You use that all the time, I'm sure. You probably used it this week. Clean energy, what does it mean? And different judgmental terms, intermittent and reliable, okay? And it is. These are all real terms, but what we're really looking at here is a transition from carbon, hay and wood, coal, to hydrocarbons, oil, to hydrogen. Methane is 4 hydrogens for every carbon, and we split that to make pure hydrogen. And then uranium and thorium for heat. A nuclear reactor just boils water. Same as coal and gas. It just boils water with its different kind of heat. So you're transitioning to something that's denser and lower carbon. It's been happening naturally, just not fast enough. And we might go back and do really large-scale solar and wind, just bigger turbines, but this is going to be tough science. It's tough physics. Lower density, lower carbon. It's not easy, okay, scientifically or economically. Let's not kid ourselves about that. So these transitions, I'll give you 3 types. Events, like remember Fukushima Daiichi in Japan? Tsunami, geologic event, wiped out a reactor. Japan shut down its nuclear program. That was an event-driven transition. Policy, France in the early 60s said, we don't have much oil and gas. We're going to go nuclear by policy. Their emissions continue to come down. Keep it up, France. Nice work. And then there's resources. And this drives a lot of things. Here's a map of the world's population today. Look at the colors. Every color is about 1.1 billion. We're not evenly distributed at all. Parts of the world are very dense. My slides are all color-coded. Gray is coal, green is oil, red is gas. So you can keep up with me because I go fast. Nuclear is orange, hydro is blue, and the solar and wind are yellow and orange and bio. 60% of the world's energy is still oil and gas, and 3% is solar and wind. Now let's look at that geopolitically. In North America, our demand is kind of flattened, which is good, starting to come down, getting more efficient, and almost 50% is coal and oil still, and about 4% solar and wind. Europe is coming down a little in demand, more efficient than us, good for Europe. Half coal and oil still, and 7% solar and wind. Russia, growing in demand, not much coal, a lot of red, a lot of natural gas. So Russia's mix, 36% coal and oil, a lot of natural gas, and no solar and wind. There's reasons for that. South America has been growing in demand, some economic challenges the last decade. When the economy suffers, energy demand dampens. A lot of oil, very little coal in South America. And about 2%, 3% solar and wind. Africa, growing in demand. Growing in population, just getting started. It's 2/3 coal and oil today, and a couple percent solar and wind. The Middle East shouldn't surprise you. It's all oil and gas, green and red. They got one nuclear reactor, and they're starting to develop some solar. Demand growing a lot. Takes a lot of energy when you live in a desert to keep yourselves alive. A lot of energy to live in Houston in the summer, keep yourselves alive, right? We just take it for granted, that little thing called air conditioning. No solar and wind yet. And then look at Asia. This is the demand for energy in Asia, and it's 3/4 coal and oil today, and a couple percent solar and wind. Now I'm going to shrink these and grow these to be proportional to consumption. Watch. Here we go. That's scaled right. Asia, half the world's population, 4 billion people, gets half their energy from coal today. That's the data. There are multiple energy transitions occurring globally today. And they composite into something that looks like this. It's very interesting. You see everything going up. No form of energy has decreased yet. Nothing. Coal's growing, oil's growing, gas is growing, and we're adding wedges. Nuclear, hydro, solar. Policy drove some of it. The Great Recession was just a dimple in demand, and so will COVID-19 be. A little deeper, but we're already back to consuming as much energy as we did pre-COVID globally. It's resources that are causing this big transition to happen, and so far we haven't eliminated anything globally. We are in different regions, as you saw, but not as a composite globally. So let's look at the U.S. electricity sector. What's our transition look like in power? A lot of coal, a lot of natural gas, growing nuclear and growing renewables. And so were CO2 emissions, up, up, up. And then COVID-19 was the Great Recession. And we flattened in our demand in the power sector. That's good, getting a little more efficient. CO2 emissions are going down in our power sector. Why is that? Well, this thing called shale gas from hydraulic fracturing or fracking made gas cheap. And it's replacing coal in a big way. Look at the gray go down and the red go up. And then state portfolio standards for renewables are increasing that up on the top. You can see the wind starting to grow. As a result of all this, some policy against coal, it's a resource transition. Our emissions, that yellow wedge, have gone negative in the power sector. Not negative, they've gone down. We met our 2030 Paris Accord target. The Clean Power Plan under Mr. Obama, we're there. We met it in 2020, a decade early, without policy. Did you know that? Who knew that? Probably not the things you stream yourselves in the morning tell you that. Would be my guess. But we did. Now, not in other sectors, but that's the fastest decrease in CO2 emissions in the world. The U.S. did it. We didn't sign Paris till now. Here's China's transition. This is all energy. The gray is coal. There's everything else. More coal than everything else. Now, it was resource, there's the CO2 emissions, by the way. It was resource driven for a while, and then it became policy. China has a coal policy. It doesn't matter what Chairman Xi says on the UN floor, they still have a coal policy. They'll continue to build coal to provide available, reliable, cheap energy to their people to lift up their economy and compete globally. China is also the leader in solar and wind and nuclear. You'll hear this, and it's true. It's a completely factual statement. I testified to the US Senate earlier this year, first hearing on climate, and we explored the concept of completely factual and factually complete. They're different, aren't they? It's pretty cool to be completely factual. Oops, I left some things out that matter. So what's the factually complete picture here? Well, there's the wind and the solar and the nuclear. See them? They're growing faster than any nation on Earth, it's true, but look at it proportional to just China's energy consumption. It's hardly visible. It's going to take a long time, and it does. Now I'm going to lay India on top of China. Here we go. Same color scheme. Here comes India. It looks similar, doesn't it? The only difference is India consumes just under a third of the energy that China does today. They have the same population. Let's slide India to the left 25 years. Watch close. Here goes India. Do you see something? Does it look the same? They're kind of where China was a quarter of a century ago. And if they follow China into the coal world, game over climate. Okay? They need options, real options for coal in India. Baseload, reliable, affordable electricity sources. Hydro, nuclear, natural gas replacing coal, some solar and wind. Now, your kids have learned this, you probably have too. The fastest growing source of electricity in the world is solar and wind. It's completely factual. Look at it, exponentially growing. How do we make it factually complete? What's missing?
Scale.
Boom. Scale. So let's scale them the same. Here we go. They're in the data. They're right there. It doesn't look as exponential. 15 years of growth, and we built the best wind and sun first. We have great wind in Texas. Some would say a lot of hot air, too. Down in my hometown, Austin. We're building the best stuff. The growth of electricity demand in that same 15 years globally is shown here, 8,400 terawatt hours. Wind and solar made up 25% of that growth. 75% of the growth is from other things, and all the base is still from other things. This is non-trivial. We've got to be really thoughtful as we start to think about these challenges in the world. What else is growing? We are, the population of the world. UN mid-range forecast, 10 or 11 billion from the 8 we're approaching today. Who consumes energy? We do. There's your energy graph. This is causative. Humans consume energy. Correlation, causation. All right? Now, you'll hear the world could be wind, water, and solar if it was just for political will. What would that look like? And by when? I modeled it out to 2065. That's all solar, wind, and hydro. How does that look to you? Let's do 75%. How does that look to you? The yellows and the blue. I mean, some are saying 2050 now. How does that look to you? It still looks pretty steep to me. I mean, like I'm looking over the, whoa, Are we ready to make that jump, or can we even make that jump? Who said this? The IEA, the International Energy Agency based in Paris, run by Fatih Birol, he's a friend, said that in their net zero emissions report earlier this year. COP26, the big climate conference that all of our people are flying to, is using this as a roadmap. I just wrote an op-ed. It might come out this week in The Hill. How did they do it? How did they make net zero emissions by 2050? Well, they took oil, gas, and coal down 75% in 28 years globally. They took coal down starting now. That's not going to happen. China and India and others continue to build new coal. They took bioenergy up 170%. Well, here's bioenergy today. It's a lot, more than you think, people cooking indoors with wood and biofuels, but it's 1/5 of oil and gas today. Well, according to this report, it's going to be the same as oil and gas in 28 years. And then we grew solar and wind 1,000% in 28 years. And we grew population, which is probably right. I hope it's not wrong. I hope we don't have some major calamity that causes that to change. And along with that, the world's economy, growing as it does with people and industrialization to $300 trillion. Now, always in the past, when we've grown the population and the economy of the world, see the energy growth? I'm going to move it. Oh, you see something, it's kind of the same trend, all right? No, in this report, they said, we're going to consume less energy in the world while we grow all these other things. And they explained 10% of it only, which wasn't very satisfactory, by the way, and didn't explain this rest of this big wedge, this energy intensity gap. It's magic. And we go from $1 trillion a year energy spend to $4 trillion a year, $120 trillion in the next 28 years. These are phenomenal numbers and a lot of other interesting assumptions. I think it's misleading. And if we go with that roadmap at COP, we're going to end up on a road to nowhere, because we're not going to be dealing with some of these real issues that we have to address climate change, the dual challenge of climate change and energy. So maybe it'll be 50% renewable, maybe just 25% renewable. What does that look like? Well, this is energy growth in the past, and my model takes the growth demand lower, more efficient, so it's a lower slope, but it doesn't go negative, all right? And I'm saying all new energy, plus some, will be from nuclear and renewables, but many would call that business as usual. This is just a model. It's not an answer or a roadmap. And I'm going to go back if I don't blow this thing up. Now let's take that exact data and plot it as a percentage. This is what's called the energy mix, okay? Same exact data from across that century, real half century and future. What does that look like? Well, we cut coal and oil in half. We double natural gas and nuclear, and 4 times more solar and wind and other renewables. That's a change from carbon to hydrocarbons to methane to hydrogen to uranium and thorium. It's that energy density thing. It's happening, but it's probably not fast enough. We got to go after those emissions. But it's mostly driven by resources. Why do we need this mix? Because when the wind and the sun aren't blowing and shining, you got to have something else there. We want our power on. That's called dispatchable. Natural gas, nuclear, hydro provide dispatchable energy. So does coal. But that makes it reliable. If I have this marriage, something has to be there to back up Texas wind. It's mostly natural gas power plants and batteries, but not many yet. So this leads me to the net zero. Here's our emissions today in the world. North America and Europe have been flat for almost 40 years and coming down. Pat ourselves on the back, you know. Maybe. Here's Asia. And here's the rest of the world just getting started. Now, why is Asia more than the rest of the world's emissions? Because they're terrible. It's just terrible Asia, right? No. Why? This is probably the most important graph I'm going to show you. If you're above that red line, you're consuming more stuff than you produce. The United States makes 5 billion tons of CO2 every year, and we consume more stuff than we produce. Okay? China makes 10 billion tons, but they produce a lot more stuff than they consume. In fact, most of the non-Club of Rich nations, the non-OECD, produce more than they consume, the blue, and most of the rich nations, us, we consume more stuff than we produce, especially Europe. So what's going on here? Well, we're importing stuff. You make our stuff. And we have moved manufacturing to Asia. Check out your label when you go home. See where your fancy shirt was made. Okay, that's not a bad or good thing. It's just a real thing. It's effectively what do we do? And we're saying, hey, you emit the CO2, and we'll be zero emissions. States are doing this too. California being the leader of you make our stuff. Same with New York. Only 11 states make more energy than they produce. 39 don't. How many atmospheres are there in the world? How many global atmospheres are there? There's one. So if my plan for climate change is you make my stuff, and by the way, in those countries, they are not as well regulated as we are, per unit product, more CO2 than us. Not a great plan. Look, I'm not judging intentions. These guys had good intentions. They're putting in posts to keep people from parking next to the building. They forgot where they parked, okay? They can't get out. This is policy. We put in policy posts all the time with good intentions, but sometimes those policies don't accomplish the outcomes that they were intended to accomplish. We need to allow policymakers the freedom to change with knowledge and not be called flip-floppers or whatever. Learn, change, adapt as we go forward. So how do you actually reduce CO2? Use less. How many left your lights on at home today? Don't be shy. How many drove in one to a vehicle today? Okay, I mean, I could keep going for the rest of the day because we just love our energy and we use it, a lot of it per capita. We could use less and not change our lifestyle. That's what our first film is about. Natural gas replacing coal will do it. Nuclear, no emissions, small modular reactors, capturing the carbon, putting it underground, technically doable. Working on the money chains right now. Batteries in some vehicles, not all vehicles, but some. Hydrogen fuel cells, geothermal and hydro. Happy to talk about any of these things that you want to, if we have time in Q&A. And then centralized wind like we have in Texas, distributed solar for the billion people in the world who have no energy today. The only way to get it to them is this. There's no roads and wires and pipelines. Okay? But all these matter. Now, I'm sorry if your only answer to climate change is solar and wind. It's not going to work. Don't shoot me. I know we love it. But it's kind of like this gate, right? It's part of it, but it's not going to stop people from going past, is it? We've got to add some other things to it to be an effective solution to lowering emissions in the time frames and at the scales needed. Oil and gas and coal impact the environment negatively. They always have, and they always will. The mining and manufacturing for the drilling equipment, the completions and drilling, the handling of the fluids that come up and putting them back on the earth, moving it around. We don't even allow pipelines in this country anymore to be built. We prefer rails and trucks and boats. Those are safer, run by humans, terrific, really. Refining and petrochemicals, and then we burn it. These have impacts. It's better where? In the rich world, we do it better because we regulate it, but it's not renewable and it's not clean. But because it underpins economies, it allows us to create investments in the environment that clean it up. That's why we have the cleanest air and clean soil and water I drink from a tap. You see the link? And we miss it sometimes, but it scares people. It probably scares you, this industry. You feel like you're in the running of the bulls and you're this poor person. This is actually the winner of the last photo taken contest, all right? I'm going to show you the runner-up because it's not what you think it's going to be. So let's go to the clean stuff. Oh, wait. The sun and the wind are renewable, but to capture it, I have to have panels and turbines and batteries to back them up. That's all mined. Oops, sorry. And then I manufacture it. In big factory, we have a gigafactory coming to, Elon's moved to Austin now, Mr. Musk, and we got a gigafactory coming. Have you been in a battery manufacturing plant? Have you seen your batteries when they corrode in your own phone or flashlights? Production, all the land we use for this because it's low density. We got to move it on power lines. We have 5 massive 345 kilovolt power lines in Texas to get the wind to where it's needed here, and then we dump it. You think we don't dump it? We dump it. 5% of your lithium-ion batteries are recycled in the world today, 5%. Those big turbine blades get buried, cut into thirds and buried. They wear out. I can show you pictures. How many think mining's green? How many think chemical manufacturing's green? How many think landfill disposal's green? Why do you like electric vehicles? That's what it takes to make batteries. Mining, manufacturing, dumping. And I love Teslas and EVs, but let's not pretend that it's binary. The sun and the wind are renewable, and this is I'm sorry. But panels, turbines, and batteries aren't. Here's the truth. There's no renewable energy. None. It all comes from the earth to capture the energy and goes back to the earth. I'm a geologist. I don't mind mining. But we have to have stuff. And if it wears out and we do it again, it's not renewable. And it all wears out. And we do it again. Okay? Runner-up, last photo taken contest as promised. If you're going to be stupid, you better be tough. Anyway, so one couple of last thoughts here. Where does it all come from, these things that are going to make our panels and turbines? China. China now owns 60% of lithium, 70% of the cobalt, growing in the nickel. Over half the world's polysilicon now from zero, your solar panels. So this is an energy security question. Your fuels right now are OPEC, kind of, for our vehicles. Your fuels for the EVs are going to be China, the batteries. You may find that more secure, you may not. I have no judgment in that, but we need to know it at least. And how is it mined? This is so well documented, the human rights violations. For those of you who are big on human rights, these are extreme violations of human rights in the mining of these materials. It's not done well. So what do you see? You see energy crises all around the world today. By the way, this isn't Fox News. Look at the headlines. Bloomberg Green, California averts blackouts by burning more gas. Federal agencies blocking wind in Colorado, so are the people. That's the Anschutz project. Coloradans love wind, just not there. Okay, and Robert Bryce points out 317 other wind projects that have been killed because we don't want it here, we want it there. Europe's crisis is coming to the rest of the world too. Yep, it probably is. Gas pipeline, Germany and Russia. There's a couple of friendly nations historically. Germany's asking Russia for more gas because their solar isn't great. It's like Seattle, and they're building wind turbines. Despite pledges to cut, China goes on a coal spree. Yeah, it's not a spree, it's their policy. India may build new coal to low cost despite climate change. Yes, they're going to, unless they get good options. The Economist tells us fossil fuel is dead. 18 years ago, they said the same thing. They'll probably say it again in 18 years. You've seen the slow data growth. Our president wants OPEC to drill for more oil instead of here. Interesting. Is it cleaner? I don't know. China rethinks the path to climate goals due to an energy crisis. Sorry for the flickering. Europe considers breaking climate promises and turning to coal this winter. Their stable electricity depends on the weather. All of a sudden, really? It hasn't for close to a century. And now we're banking on a warm winter. Vietnam's power may double. It will under coal. I've been there. I've talked to their leaders. That's their coal. That's their energy policy, 50 new plants, unless they get good options. And the chairman of China is not going to COP. Mr. Putin just announced he isn't either. And just today, I just cut this out and pasted it in here. New York won't build new gas. You might not like gas, but it's a hell of a lot cleaner than burning coal or importing your electricity from somebody who does burn coal. We've got to start to think about the trade-offs as we go forward here. This is the balance of trade change between China and the US in 20 years. It's flipped. And this is Europe. GDP has gone down from 40 to 25%, and market cap of their companies has gone down to 15%. These are big deals, okay? I'm almost finished. So energy science and economics can't be changed by political will. They can be temporarily overridden. So how do we get here? You got this radical middle, and it feels like it's shrinking in the US and Europe, doesn't it? It's getting smaller. We talk about wanting to visit with one another, but do we really bring people in, like me, to talk to you? Which I'm impressed by the way. That's why I come here. Not because I'm left or right. I vote all over the board, just to talk about these things. The rest of the world, that radical middle is starting to grow. They're excited. They're getting energized. They're starting to be what we did. So you got to reduce the impacts of all forms of energy on all forms of the environment. You got to end energy poverty, grow the global economy, and then cheap, reliable, and clean. If I bring those together, that's equitable, that's sustainable, that's justice in energy. And it takes critical thinking, energy education. The coming decade, alternatives will grow. Coal will dominate Asia. Natural gas is going to grow globally. The whole environment will begin to matter again. In addition, not just the atmosphere, which is critical. EVs and fuel cells and internal combustion engines, there'll be a spread of them depending on where you are. Solar and wind are going to grow. They need backup for reliability. Nuclear, hydrogen, these are the new energies. And finally, humans are going to transition from poverty to prosperity. If we don't do that last one, none of the rest of this happens. We've got to close this wealth inequality gap. And energy is a piece of that. Stable energy. Here's the map of the world's population. I'm going to fade that into the world at night. Have you seen this satellite view of the world at night? It's phenomenal. Remember where the energy is and how much is consumed? Now you know just not where the lights are on, but why. They have energy and where they're off. And we're talking about leaving 90% of it in the ground. Has a name here now. It's always been around, by the way. The newest name is the Green New Deal. You might support it. I don't know. 90% left in the ground. Look around the world and see what's left. First of all, they're not going to do it. So we've got to get other options. But let's just darken the lights on the world by 90%. How's that look to you? Looks like the past to me, not the future. The future is different. We've got to quit talking about fuels and reduce emissions. Focus on the emissions and let things compete. Basic human needs to 3 to 4 billion people on Earth: clothing, water, shelter, education, and healthcare, refrigeration, rights and empowerment of women. Women go for the water. Women cook indoors. Women aren't in the schools when their male counterparts are in impoverished nations. It's just differentially disproportionate, impacts women. Immigration and migration away from autocracies towards hope. Population growth is directly tied to access to education, which is underpinned by energy. Invest in the environment, adapt to climate. Okay? You bring all that together, it's not simple, but it's solvable. It betters the world. And I think that's what we're all trying to do just a little bit. And your theme, healing divides, that's where it happens. Thanks for your attention today.